30 years ago, NVIDIA was a desperate startup fighting for its absolute survival. Today, it sits right at the center of the artificial intelligence revolution, powering everything from advanced medical research to that ChatGPT prompt you used this morning. But this world-changing success, it was never guaranteed. In fact, for a long time, the rest of the tech industry thought they were totally doomed. So how exactly did a company built primarily to make PC video games look prettier become the undisputed king of artificial intelligence? It is honestly one of the greatest pivots in business history. It required incredible foresight, a massive tolerance for risk, and a willingness to bet literally everything on a technology the rest of the world didn't even understand yet.
Okay, let's dive into this. To truly understand the NVIDIA of today, you really have to grasp the sheer desperation of its early days. For years, CEO and co-founder Jensen Huang would start internal company presentations with this exact, terrifying motto: "Our company is 30 days from going out of business." Back in the 1990s, that wasn't some corporate motivational tactic. That was their day-to-day reality.
Chapter 1. The Denny Startup.
Let's rewind to 1993. Jensen Huang, Chris Malachowski, and Curtis Prame are sitting in a booth at a San Jose Denny's, which is kind of poetic, considering Jensen actually washed dishes there at age 15. Now 30, drinking cheap diner coffee, the three of them decided to start a tech company. A lawyer demanded cash to incorporate them, so they literally emptied their pockets, pulling exactly $200 each, $600 total. Their grand vision was to build 3D graphics chips for personal computers, but there was a massive problem. As investors bluntly pointed out, the market for PC 3D graphics at the time was exactly $0 billion. Nobody was doing it. They were essentially betting their entire livelihoods on teenagers playing video games.
Chapter 2. 30 Days from Bankruptcy. Creating a market entirely from scratch is incredibly dangerous, and NVIDIA learned this the hard way. Their very first product, the NV1, was a massive technical gamble. They designed their chip to render graphics using quadrilaterals, four-sided shapes. But almost immediately after they launched it, Microsoft announced that its DirectX software, which was going to dictate the entire industry standard for PCs, would only support graphics built out of triangles. In an instant, with one software announcement, NVIDIA's architecture became entirely obsolete. They had poured everything into a brilliant product for a world that was simply never going to exist.
So, by 1995, the complete failure of the NV1 pushed NVIDIA right to the brink of collapse. They were burning through their venture capital at an alarming rate. Jensen had to make a brutal, gut-wrenching decision. He laid off more than half of his entire staff, dropping the company from about 100 employees down to just 40. Every single remaining dollar was poured into designing a new triangle-based chip called the Riva 128. If this one failed, NVIDIA was dead, period. But it gets worse. They didn't actually have enough money left to finish the Riva 128. They were, however, under contract to build a chip for the Sega Dreamcast console. Jensen looked at their design and realized it was fundamentally flawed. In a desperate, total Hail Mary move, he went to Sega's CEO and told him the contract needed to be canceled. But then, he begged him to pay NVIDIA in full anyway, and incredibly, the CEO agreed. That $5 million act of grace gave NVIDIA a literal 6-month lifeline. It fully funded the Riva 128, which eventually sold 1 million units and single-handedly saved the company from the graveyard. Chapter 3. The GPU Revolution.
Having miraculously survived near death, NVIDIA was about to introduce something vastly more powerful than standard graphics accelerators. Enter the GPU, or Graphics Processing Unit. So what exactly is it? Unlike a standard processor that calculates things sequentially, one after the other, a GPU is a highly specialized electronic circuit designed to do thousands of calculations at the exact same time. It rapidly manipulates memory to render complex images instantly.
To put that into perspective, think of a computer's CPU, the central processing unit, as a brilliant generalist. It can do absolutely anything you ask it to, but it handles those complex tasks sequentially. A GPU, on the other hand, is a specialist. It takes a massive, overwhelming problem, breaks it down into thousands of tiny little pieces, and solves them all simultaneously. This parallel processing was absolutely perfect for rendering millions of changing pixels in a 3D video game, but secretly, it was the exact architecture needed for something much, much bigger.
In 1999, NVIDIA released the GeForce 256. They actively marketed it as the world's very first GPU, and it was a monumental turning point. It completely dominated the PC gaming market, it took the company public, and it won them the massively lucrative contract to power Microsoft's original Xbox console. They had done it. They were officially the undisputed kings of gaming.
Chapter 4. The Billion-Dollar CUDA Moat.
But Jensen Huang didn't just want to be a gaming company. He wanted to build a fundamental computing company. So, in 2006, NVIDIA made what might honestly be the greatest strategic gamble in modern business history. They developed CUDA. It was a software platform that allowed developers to program GPUs for general-purpose tasks, not just graphics. But to make it an industry standard, NVIDIA forced this expensive architecture into every single gaming chip they sold. Gamers didn't need it, but they were paying for it. Research and development costs skyrocketed by 50%. Their profit margins completely crashed. Wall Street punished them fiercely for this, plummeting NVIDIA's market cap down to just $1.5 billion. They were taking a massive financial beating, all to build infrastructure for a market that, once again, didn't even exist yet.
For years, there was absolutely zero return on this massive software investment. But Jensen held firm. He famously stated, "NVIDIA is the house that GeForce built." By forcing CUDA into millions of computers worldwide, teenagers playing video games were unwittingly funding a decade of advanced supercomputing research. Think about it. Graduate students and scientists suddenly realized they had a literal supercomputer sitting in their dorm room PC. So they started using CUDA to run complex simulations for weather, quantum physics, and eventually, artificial intelligence. And this brilliantly illustrates the secret to NVIDIA's absolute dominance today. It is not just the silicon. They build a massive, impenetrable four-layer moat. At the very base is the physical hardware, the GPUs themselves. Layered directly on top of that is the CUDA foundation, the fundamental programming model. Above that, you have deep learning libraries like CUDA-DN. And finally, sitting at the top, the actual AI models. If a competitor wants to challenge NVIDIA, they can't just build a faster chip. They have to completely rebuild this entire, deeply entrenched software stack that the world's developers have spent nearly 2 decades mastering.
Chapter 5. The AI Supercomputer. This is the exact moment where that long-term $0 billion bet finally pays off. In 2012, researchers made a massive breakthrough, realizing that neural networks, the foundational brains of modern AI, required massive parallel processing to learn. It turned out the exact same math used to render a 3D explosion in a video game was the exact math needed to train an AI brain. NVIDIA's GPUs were perfectly positioned. By 2016, Jensen hand-delivered the very first AI supercomputer to an ambitious little startup called OpenAI. And when ChatGPT launched in 2022, it sparked a global arms race. Suddenly, every single tech giant on Earth desperately needed NVIDIA. Now, what's really interesting about this is the sheer pricing power this gave them. Because NVIDIA had the absolute best hardware, and developers were already entirely locked into their CUDA software, demand completely outstripped supply. To put this in perspective, an H100 AI GPU cost roughly $3,320 to manufacture. But due to intense scarcity and desperation, NVIDIA sells them for around $28,000 apiece. That is a staggering 80+% gross margin, transforming a once struggling startup into a multi-trillion-dollar juggernaut almost overnight.
Today, NVIDIA essentially operates a monopoly in the high-end enterprise space. They hold a massive 80% of the global market share for AI accelerators. Competitors like AMD and all the custom chips being built by tech giants are left fighting over the remaining 20%. But make no mistake, NVIDIA remains the undisputed standard. And breaking that monopoly is going to be incredibly difficult. The structural barriers are massive. There are over 4 million developers globally fluent in CUDA. Practically every major machine learning framework has been optimized for NVIDIA first for the past 15 to 20 years. For a company to switch hardware, the cost is measured in years of lost productivity, not just dollars. Furthermore, NVIDIA has locked down roughly 60% of the advanced packaging capacity at TSMC, the world's leading chip manufacturer. Even if a rival somehow designs a better chip tomorrow, they literally cannot physically manufacture them fast enough to catch up.
Chapter 6. The Future.
As one managing director at Raymond James perfectly summarized it, there's a war in AI out there, and right now, NVIDIA is the only arms dealer. They are literally selling the fundamental infrastructure of the future, but they face intense, highly funded competition, most notably from AMD, whose CEO, Lisa Su, is actually Jensen Huang's cousin, which is wild. And beyond these fierce corporate rivalries, the geopolitical risks surrounding semiconductor manufacturing in Taiwan pose a massive, looming threat that could theoretically sever the entire industry's supply chain overnight. So, what does this all mean? It leaves us with a billion-dollar question. Will NVIDIA's incredibly risky strategy of continually betting on $0 billion markets keep them on the throne? Or will the combined trillions of dollars from rivals like AMD, Google, and Microsoft finally crack the CUDA software moat? The AI revolution has really only just begun, and the infrastructure that will power your future hangs entirely in the balance. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep your eyes on the chips.